Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, first of all today is a new legal challenge about to be launched that will put obstacles in the way of Theresa May's plans for Brexit. Lawyers are arguing that June's vote may have mandated our withdrawal from the European Union, but not a lesser-known organisation called the European Economic Area. Theresa May has admitted that decisions over Brexit are keeping her awake at night. And this is just the latest nightmare to disturb her sleep. Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, continues to haunt the Prime Minister after calling for a transitional period of 2 years to delay Britain's departure from the single market. Meanwhile, 80 Conservative MPs, led by Michael Tomlinson, will today demand both EU residents in the UK and UK residents in the EU be given reciprocal rights following Brexit, saying that people are not bargaining chips. 3 of her more regular tormentors, Anna Soubry, Nick Clegg and Chuka Umunna, also joined forces this morning, saying that British industry would be harmed by a sector-by-sector free trade agreement instead of staying in the single market. And Theresa May has a fresh nightmare today, with British influence-backed lawyer Joylan Morm arguing that leaving the EU will not automatically mean leaving the European Economic Area, threatening to take the government back to court if it tries without going through Parliament. But will she be given any comfort today by her Polish counterpart, Beata Szydło, who is meeting Theresa May at Downing Street? She says Poland will be a constructive partner to the UK and calls for a good compromise with the EU for Britain. Brexit may well be disturbing Jeremy Corbyn's sleep too. Yesterday, Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry refused to rule out a second referendum on whatever Brexit deal emerged, a position apparently at odds with her shadow cabinet colleagues. And this morning, Labour backbencher Dan Jarvis has said that any perceived failure to accept the voters' verdict on Brexit and immigration would act as a toxic mix for Labour. Well, we're joined now by the former Northern Ireland Secretary and Leave campaigner Theresa Villiers. Welcome to the Daily Politics. The referendum ballot paper asked people whether to stay in the EU, not the EEA. So these lawyers do have a right to say that you have no mandate to take us out of the EEA and, by definition, the single market.
Well, we're only in the EEA because we're currently a member of the EU. Article 2C of the EEA agreement makes that clear. So I think that this court proceedings will be dismissed, because once we leave the EU, we automatically cease to be members of the EEA.
But you can be a member of the EEA or the European Free Trade Area without being a member of the EU. So don't the lawyers have a right to say that if you do want to underline that departure from the EEA, you'd have to do it through Parliament?
Well, I believe that this court case is just another way to try and overturn the result, another way to muddy the waters, to delay things. But even in the worst case scenario, that they turned out to be right, they got it all the way to the Supreme Court, the worst case scenario would be that Parliament would have to vote on this, in which case Parliament should get on and vote, because that is the way to respect the result of the referendum.
Is Theresa Villiers right? It's just an attempt to muddy the waters and try and prolong what they see as agony.
Yeah, so this legal action is being launched by an organisation I'd never heard of before today called British Influence. It sounds like it should be vaguely pro-British, but actually you Google it and you find out that it's an organisation that exists to promote the European Union. So it's exactly as Theresa says. They are trying to basically find a legal route to try and slow down or block Brexit. I don't think it changes the big picture one bit. We are coming out of the European Union, and if we have to do a separate instrument through Parliament just to technically get us out of the EEA as well, then so be it.
Right, but you wouldn't support us staying in the European Economic Area because, as you know, the argument there is that would then perhaps allow us to stay within the single market and give us the sort of access that many companies currently would like to keep.
Yeah, so I don't think staying in the EEA is actually consistent with what people voted for on the 23rd of June, which was for Britain to leave the European Union, which was for a return of sovereignty and for British law to be clearly superior to the law of the European Union.
Do you agree with that, Lisa and Andy?
So I think part of the difficulty that we've got is that we don't, apart from the fact that we know that Britain voted by a majority to leave the European Union, what we don't know is what people were actually voting for or what that looks like. And one of the reasons that this mess has ended up yet again in the courts is because we haven't had any clarity at all from the government about what the shape of this Brexit deal looks like. I mean, I really agree with you that the way that we should resolve this is that we should have this debate in Parliament and we should have this debate with the public. We've all accepted that we're leaving the European Union, and 5 months after that vote was taken, it beggars belief, frankly, that we haven't made any progress towards what that is.
And as Lisa and Andy says, it's going to be held up potentially in the courts. Now, the government's already lost one case. I know it's going to the Supreme Court and we will hear a decision shortly. Are you filled with confidence that the government would win a second case on this argument about coming out of the European Economic Area?
Yes, I am confident. I think that's clear that the government would win this case. But the important thing is to make progress on the negotiations. And of course that will start once Article 50 is tabled.
Right, but if the government does have to introduce separate legislation in the way both of you have conceded that, well, in your case, certainly the worst case scenario, they would have to then repeal what's called Article 127. Do you think MPs would feel bound to vote the same way as with Article 50, or do you think they might think twice?
I think it certainly makes for a more varied debate. Certainly, I think there'll be a diverse range of opinions being expressed in Parliament. But people need to listen to their constituents here and listen to what people felt that they were voting for on the 23rd of June. And listen, I was somebody who's on the Remain side of the argument. I spent months campaigning against this, but I've recognised that what people fundamentally were voting for was, and that phrase, take back control, which was the most powerful phrase that anyone spoke during the referendum campaign. That's really about sovereignty. It's about saying that British laws will be made in Parliament and will not be counteracted by a European Court of Justice. It's about showing voters that actually immigration policy is being made within our shores, not being made in Brussels. So if people want those things, then it isn't consistent with staying in the EEA.
Do you agree that if we remain in the EEA, this European Economic Area, then the UK cannot take back control?
Well, I disagree with what Stephen was just saying, actually, about take back control. I agree with you that it somehow captured the mood of many people in constituencies like mine. But actually, that was much more for the constituents that I spoke to during the campaign about wanting to see real power over the things that matter in their lives, whether that's decent quality work or family time to spend with your family, or being able to make decisions about the way that local services are run. And this is part of the trouble, isn't it? Is that we've had this referendum without any real thought given by the government as to what comes next. And now suddenly we're all sitting in a TV studio in London trying to define what people meant all over the country. And we should have been having that debate from the very beginning.
And we will come back to that very shortly, particularly the idea that actually if we did stay within the EEA, then we would still have to pay contributions to budgets. We would also have to have freedom of movement. But I'm going to break in because UKIP has a new leader. We've already announced it. Its second new leader in just a few months. It's Paul Nuttall, and he joins us now. Congratulations on your victory, Paul Nuttall. Why do you think UKIP members backed you over your rivals?
Because I've not just talked the talk, I've walked the walk. I've been in the party for 12 years. I've been by far the most experienced candidate, having been the party chairman, the head of policy, Nigel's deputy leader for the past 6 years, and the party now realises that it has to come together, it has to unify, it has to stay on the pitch and hold the government's feet to the fire on Brexit, and that's why they've given me the biggest mandate in the history of the party today.
Was it a fair election contest, Paul Nuttall? One of your fellow candidates for the leadership, John Rhys-Evans, said on this programme last week the whole election process has been compromised and alleged some party officials may have misused databases to promote their favoured candidate. What do you say to John Rhys-Evans?
Well, that isn't something I've witnessed. I know with the last leadership election, for example, there were 100 complaints. With this leadership election, apparently, there's been 10. So, I mean, it's minuscule. I think that the election has been good-humoured and fair, and it's been precisely what UKIP has needed. The last thing UKIP would have needed is a a leadership election which involved infighting and backbiting and whatnot. We didn't have that. We had a good-humoured contest, and now we can move on.
Right, no, because the party was so busy involved and embroiled in months of chaotic infighting. How are you going to deal with that?
But you know what, Joe? I've never been part of any faction in the party. I generally get along with everyone. And I think, you know what happened the other month? What happened the other month in Strasbourg, when we had the altercation between the two MEPs, was probably in the long run the best thing that happened to the party. Because
Really?
everyone woke up and smelt the coffee. Yes, I do, because everyone woke up, smelt the coffee, and understood that this was now an existential crisis. And it was my duty to step in, stand in this election, win it, and bring the party together. And
Right.
that's what I intend to do.
Well, and one of the ways, of course, you can bring a party together after a difficult few months is by the people that you put on your team. Who have you appointed?
I've already appointed Peter Whittle, the London Assembly member, as my deputy. I've appointed, subject to NEC approval, Paul Oakton, the party chairman, who I think has basically steered the ship brilliantly over the summer during these difficult months. And I've appointed Patrick O'Flynn as my senior political advisor. And within the next 72 hours, there will be appointments of party officers and appointments of spokespeople in big numbers. So
Right.
I will hit the ground running. I know the party inside out. This isn't going to be a problem in the long run.
Not the most diverse group of people you've just mentioned there, I have to say. But what about Suzanne Evans, who also ran for the leadership? Why didn't you give her something?
Joe, if you hold your horses
Ah.
and wait, there will be an announcement regarding Suzanne Evans tomorrow. As I said at all the hustings, I'm going to build a team of all talents, and the one thing you can say about Suzanne Evans is she has a lot of talent.
Right, so what's her job? Go on, tell us.
I'm not going to tell you.
Why not? But there isn't much diversity, though, in the group of people you've announced so far. Would you agree?
Oh, come on. I mean, that's splitting hairs. I mean, I've literally appointed 3 people. I mean, if you
Four, I
want
think.
diversity, Peter Whittle is my deputy is an open homosexual. If you want diversity, there will be lots of women who will be announced in my new team over the next 72 hours. So look, you know, this is a party which is now going to move forward. We've had problems over the past couple of months, but now we're going to restructure the party and we're going to get ready for the battle ahead, starting in Sleaford and then hopefully a few by-elections next year as well.
The UKIP donor, Aaron Banks, suggested you were a reluctant leader, and I think you yourself certainly thought about it before you went for the job. And he also suggested you lacked the steel necessary to sort out the difficulties, and they are big difficulties the party's experienced. What's changed your mind, and have you got the steel?
Well, firstly, I'll deal with the steel issue. You know, the easy thing for me to do, Joe, would have been to pick a side and then drum the other faction out of the party. That would have been the weak thing to do and the wrong thing to do and the coward's thing to do. I've showed steel because I said I'm not picking a side. I'm going to bring this thing back together and I'm going to move it forward and turn it into a real movement of working people that is going to go into these Labour constituencies and hopefully in many areas replace the Labour Party. As for me wanting to do it, look, one of the reasons I've done it is because it's my duty to do it. I was watching over the summer the party I love and the party which I've helped build from absolutely nothing begin to fall to bits. So it's my duty to step in, not just steady the ship, but take it forward to bigger and better things.
All right, well, let's pick up some of the things you've mentioned there that will be in your in-tray. On Brexit, how specifically will you put pressure on the government to deliver what you would like to see in terms of leaving the EU?
Simple. It's electorally. You know, think tanks and sort of political movements that don't stand in elections are all fine and dandy. But the only way you change things in British politics is by being an electoral threat. And we saw that in 2013. The only reason Mr Cameron offered to give the referendum was because UKIP was growing in size, growing in the polls, and had become an electoral threat. That's how we intend to hold the government's feet to the fire over Brexit.
Right, well, in the same breath, then, how are you going to bring voters, Labour voters, over to UKIP?
Well, very easy. Jeremy Corbyn seems to be doing a very good job of that himself. We are now going to begin to speak the language of ordinary working people. We're going to move into the areas that the Labour Party have neglected. You know, people up in the north and the Midlands and in working class communities right across the kingdom, I'm sure can have no real affinity with people like Corbyn and John McDonnell and Diane Abbott and Emily Thornberry. You know, these people are part of some sort of North London Islington set. And what we will do is we will focus on the issues that really matter to working class people on doorsteps: immigration, crime, defence, foreign aid, ensuring that British people are put to the top of the queue in the job market. So we're going to go out there, we're going to campaign, and you're going to see a big rise in the UKIP vote in Labour areas under my leadership.
If you are expecting to increase the UKIP vote, what would success actually look like in terms of seats at the next general election?
Oh, well, of course, we would be looking for an improvement on the last one, which wouldn't be very difficult. We're looking at least for into double figures. You know, we are really now going to target sensibly, not have that scattergun approach that we've had in the past. And it's quite clear, the areas where we're now winning councillors, drilling down in local communities and beginning to make a difference.
All right, so
already.
double figures then. You're saying double figures of UKIP seats in the 2020 general election?
Well, I would hope so, Joe, but you know, you are putting me on the spot. I was only elected 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, but as you've said, you keep saying how long you've been in the party for. You haven't just stepped onto the UKIP stage, have you? You're not a newbie in that sense. Now, UKIP is under investigation, as you know, by the Electoral Commission over allegations the party misspent EU funds, considerable EU funds, during the referendum campaign. And your rival for the top job, John Rhys-Evans, told the Daily Politics last week that it wouldn't surprise him if certain abuses happened. So he didn't have much faith. What do you think?
Well, we've made it perfectly clear in our defence. You know, we had 2 compliance officers who said everything was absolutely fine. We've done nothing different to any of the other pan-European parties, and we expect to be vindicated. And in the end, Joe, this looks to me as if this is nothing but revenge for Brexit by the European Parliament, and this could well end up in the European Court of Justice, and I absolutely 100% believe that we will be found innocent.
All right. I mean, you say you're going to bring the party together. One of the big problems you have is you've already lost quite a few people. People defecting to the Tories or becoming independent. Douglas Carswell, your party's only MP, hinted last week that he could rejoin the Conservative Party before the next general election. Stephen Wolfe, Diane James, these are all people who have left the party. How are you going to reach out to them?
Well, I don't think Douglas is going anywhere because I'm just looking at him on the stairs right now. So Douglas isn't going to be a problem. As for those who've gone, you know, I'm always sad when people leave the party at any level. And I hope that one day they may think about coming back under a new leadership. Look, we've had a very difficult summer. You know, it was as if UKIP won the referendum. You know, it stopped fighting the European Union and it looked around and decided what else it could fight, and in many ways it decided to fight each other. That is over now. It's finished. We're now going to look forward and not backwards. Right. And I just think, under my leadership, with a united UKIP, I wouldn't want to be Labour and Conservative MPs, because I tell you what, if you're a Remainer, and it doesn't matter what colour you are, we're coming after you.
Just briefly, what are you going to do with Nigel Farage?
Well, that'll be up to Nigel. I know he's off to the States next week. I'd like Nigel to be in this country as often as possible and being a roaming voice for the party. I would like to offer him the honorary presidency of the party alongside Geoffrey Tifford, but I still think you will find Nigel Farage will be a prominent voice in the party, on the airwaves and on TV shows like this. Yeah,
I'm sure he will be, if he has anything to do with it. In terms of other elections coming up, the French presidential election, would you back Marine Le Pen for that job?
This leader of UKIP will not be involving himself in any foreign elections.
Right, so no view at all on it?
This leader of UKIP will not be involving himself in any foreign elections. It's as simple as that.
Right.
I'll be concentrating on council elections, by-elections and getting the party ready for 2020 in this country.
Do you still think it was a mistake Nigel Farage backed Donald Trump?
Sorry, what was that?
Do you still think it was a mistake that Nigel Farage backed Donald Trump?
Well, he's struck gold, hasn't he? He's been proven absolutely right. He was the only mainstream
so it wasn't a mistake.
politician.
You were wrong to criticise it.
Yes. Well, do you know, I didn't agree with some of the things that Donald Trump was saying during the campaign. I thought in many ways he had the right messages but was the wrong candidate. Now he's won, it's quite clear that he's an Anglophile. it's quite clear that he wants to put Britain at the front of the queue when it comes to any trade deal. And look, this was a guy who backed Brexit, so I think the special relationship is going to be safe with the Trump administration.
Paul Nuttall, thank you very much.
Cheers, Joe.
Lisa Nandy, UKIP speaking the language of ordinary working people. There's no real affinity in areas like yours with Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Emily Thornberry, what he called the North London elite.
I think the challenge for Paul, actually, is whether he can change the party. He said they want to learn to start speaking the language of ordinary people in the north of England. And although a lot of people in constituencies like mine very much agreed with UKIP about wanting to leave the EU, I think they had precisely the opposite vision of what comes next from people like Nigel Farage.
Even on the issue of immigration. I mean, even your colleague Dan Jarvis has said today that actually those Labour MPs who do not accept the verdict of the referendum, as he saw it, a lot of it about immigration, will lose their seats.
Yeah, so I think people want to see the impact of immigration dealt with. So particularly where we were talking about attracting people into this country to be able to work in services like the National Health Service, which has done a lot of good for those services and for people here. Young people in constituencies like mine were saying, but we would love to work in that National Health Service, so why aren't you investing in us too? I think people were asking for more money, not less, for the National Health Service.
Is it just about the impact? Is it just about the impact, though, or is it about fewer people and the numbers?
It's about who comes, where they work and what impact that has
So not
on
fewer.
other people.
No.
So it depends. So it depends, for example, if you are a tradesperson working in London where you're competing with migrant workers who are prepared to live in damp, dirty, overcrowded housing so that you can cut your costs and you're seeing your wages go down as a consequence, then I think that's about having a minimum level of skills or qualifications that we require from people in order to drive those wages up. But if you're a young person in a town like Wigan, where you've just lost your nursing bursary and you're being told to thank your lucky stars that we can attract people in to come and work in the National Health Service, then it's about bringing back the nursing bursary in that pathway for you.
But that means you wouldn't reduce the numbers. I mean, in the end, people will want a straight answer on that, as well as the impact. Would you or wouldn't you reduce the numbers?
But it's not about an arbitrary cap, because in the end, what that will do is real damage for our public services. And the problem Paul's got is that his party were fighting a campaign that said they would be putting more money into public services after the referendum. And instead, what we heard in the autumn statement is actually there's going to be less money for public services because we voted to leave the EU. And I don't know how he's going to resolve that.
Right, and Stephen Crabb, of course, the cap hasn't worked, has it? The net migration figures haven't come down to the tens of thousands over the last Parliament and still in this Parliament. So there is no point in having a cap.
Well, we set a target which we haven't met, and the economy is...
Which you couldn't meet the first time, and you're still well off.
Yeah, and the economy is performing in a way which nobody had predicted, i.e. it's creating lots more jobs year after year. Nobody predicted the employment boom that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. As a result, there are parts of the country, Joe, where there's effectively full employment, where there are businesses saying we need more workers. There isn't the population of young available labour in that locality.
So do we need to reduce the numbers?
Well, I'm quite open-minded on the immigration issue. For me, while I said earlier that fundamentally for many people when they voted for Britain to leave the European Union, they did want to see that immigration policy was coming back to the UK for full control. But actually we need to have an honest debate about immigration in the future. The British population structure is changing. We're becoming an older society. The truth is we're probably going to need more immigrants in the future, probably not less, to do all those kind of jobs that the young talent pool isn't available to do.
Right, in a word, actually, we do need high levels of immigration. Do you agree with Stephen Crabb?
Well, because of our manifesto commitment, obviously I support attempts to bring the numbers down below 100,000.
Right.
I think everyone acknowledges that that's going to be very difficult. But
Do you actually think it's achievable?
I think it is achievable. It may, I have to say, it's going to take a while, and certainly it's not achievable until we take back control over immigration and bring free movement to an end in its current
But you'd be
form.
prepared to bring down the levels to tens of thousands, even if it affected public services and looking after an ageing population in the way Stephen Crabb outlined?
Well, I think it's possible to reduce immigration without damaging public services. I think it is important for us to attempt to fulfil the commitment we made in our manifesto. As I say, it won't be easy, it'll take a long time, but I think we shouldn't give that up as an aspiration.
Right, well, do you agree with Theresa Villiers? You can do both?
I think it's very, very difficult to achieve. And things like foreign students, for example. I mean, it is a nonsense that we count those in our immigration figures. It's a good thing for people to come to study in our universities. They bring in cash from overseas. We shouldn't be counting them as part of our permanent immigration.
I think this is really cheap politics, actually, because I think what you're doing is you're trying to pretend to people that you can fix some very real problems in their lives by having an arbitrary target around numbers. And what that will do, as you know and as Stephen has suggested, is it will leave a much smaller working age population trying to pay for the welfare state that supports rightly the very young and the very old in this country. So not only are you going into that with no plan about how you'll mitigate the damage to public services, but you're not saying anything about investing in young people in towns like mine who deserve the chance to be able to compete in the competitive system that we have.
Of course we want to invest in our young people to give them the skills they need to get these jobs in public services. And
but then why aren't you doing it?
But we have to respond to public concern about unsustainable levels of migration. I'm not saying that we bring this down to zero. Of course migration will continue. Of course it can help our economy, but we need to get it down to more sustainable levels if we're to respond to the result of the referendum and the public concern there is.
But your
about
job
this
is to our job as politicians is to actually solve some of the real problems that this country has. And what you're arguing essentially is that all you want to do is respond to something that you've heard rather than actually lead this country forwards.
No, I'm
and
just
solve
saying
those very
I
real
was
problems.
elected on a manifesto which made a commitment to bring down net migration. That's what I think has to do.
And we'll have to leave it there, except just briefly to ask, you said yesterday, Lisa and Andy, that there was no appetite amongst Labour MPs for a second referendum, but Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, her comments literally an hour before suggested otherwise. Is the Labour policy that Labour MPs and Labour will not frustrate the will of the people as a result of the referendum and will not try and block Article 50 being triggered?
Well, actually, what I said yesterday is that I don't think there is a strong appetite in the country for a second referendum. I certainly don't hear that from my constituents.
And amongst Labour MPs?
Well, I think most Labour MPs feel quite strongly that we've had that referendum, we made the argument and we lost it, and now our job is to get on.
So why is Emily Thornberry not being clear about what the Labour line is on this?
Well, I saw what she said, and she did what I suppose a lot of politicians do, which is she answered the points that she wanted to make rather than answering the question. But our position is very clear that our job now, 5 months after we've had that vote, is to make sure we make some progress in what the post-Brexit Britain will look like and not start rehashing old arguments about the referendum again.
Theresa Villiers, thank you.